Hi, it's Kira, and this is my September wrap-up. I read 33 books in September, which is a lot of books, I can't lie. This is my best reading month ever, for both quantity of books and pages read. And I've just kind of been non-stop this month, I don't know what happened. But I'm really kind of pleased with the amount of books I read. It's way more than usual. And I'll just get straight into this wrap-up because I feel like it's going to be quite a long one. Firstly, this month, I read The Gravity of Us by Phil Stamper. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book, but my only kind of quarrel with this book was that it's a male-male romance, but also it doesn't focus on that relationship enough for me, like in my opinion. And it's much more about other parts of the plot, but like, I signed up for a male-male romance and that's what I thought I was getting. But obviously, it's just not what I got, so... You know, I still enjoyed the book. I still think it was quite a good book. And I'm really excited to read Phil Stamper's next book when it comes out next year. Then I read Naturally Tan by Tan France. This has been on my TBR for the longest time. This is Tan France from Queer Eye's autobiography. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was really interesting to kind of see his growth and kind of where he's come from to where he is now. But the book kind of jumped around quite a bit and it was kind of mismatched, I guess. Hence the 3 stars rather than high rated. But I did really enjoy reading this book and I always find it like super interesting to kind of read about other people's lives. Then we have Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Ado-Lodge. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really kind of valuable, really important to read for everyone, especially people who kind of think that Britain isn't racist, or if you've ever heard someone say that to you, if anyone's said that around you, if you've got a friend that thinks that, recommend them this book, you know? Then I read Carrie by Stephen King. This was September's pick for the Stephen King book club. I gave this 3 stars. I was kind of disappointed by this book. It's not a very long read, so I got through it quite quickly, but also it felt like such a drag at the same time. I enjoyed the concept, but I just didn't love the execution. I think this is the first book published by Stephen King, and you can kind of tell like how his writing has kind of grown over like the past, whatever it is, 30-40 years since this book came out. I don't know when it was, to be honest, but it's been a while. Then I read Wonder by R.J. Palacio. I gave this 4 stars. I thought this was a kind of really moving story. It's a middle grade, and I don't read enough middle grade, but just really loved this story. It was kind of inspiring, it was moving, and it was just really interesting to see a different POV. Basically, he starts going to a public school when he's been homeschooled for the past however long, and it's kind of his story of his first year in school. Then we have You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. I also gave this 4 stars. I love this book. It's about Liz. Basically, her scholarship gets cancelled or something like that, and she can't afford to go to her dream college if she doesn't get a scholarship. So basically, what happens is the prom queen and king get scholarships or something like that. It's been so long since I read this. I know I really enjoyed it, but it's just not like in here because I've read so many books since. This has a sapphic romance, and I really enjoyed it. Then we have All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. This is another book that's been on my TBR for the longest time and I finally got to it. I also gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was so sad and heartbreaking and also kind of heartwarming at the same time. I love these characters, although I felt like I couldn't entirely grasp and like relate to these characters as much as I wanted to, even though we kind of have some similar experiences, which was quite disappointing for me, but also I really enjoyed the book overall, so I guess it's fine, right? Then we have The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. The start of this book, when I first started reading it, I thought, wow, this is 100% going to be a 5-star read for me. But as it went on, it was just less and less likely to be a 5-star for me. I got so kind of wound up with this book because it just dragged on so much unnecessarily. Like, it could have done with maybe like 100 pages cut out of it, where they're just kind of walking around the streets and doing nothing. And it just bored me so much. I still give this book a 4 stars. I still really enjoyed it. And that like first like maybe 40-50%, I absolutely loved it. And then there was like this chunk in the middle that was kind of boring, and then it got interesting again. And yeah, I think I'm definitely going to pick up the sequel to this book because I'm really curious. Then I read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is my favourite read of the month. I gave it 5 stars. It might be my only 5-star of the month, I think. Possibly. I just loved it so much. It's basically the story of the fictional starlet Evelyn Hugo. She's like an elderly woman now, and she gets this journalist to write a book about her life and like her 7 husbands, etc., and kind of what she's been through. So, and it's really interesting, and there's like this little kind of reveal at the end where you're like, I think Taylor Jenkins Reid is such a talented author. I'm really excited to look at some of her other work, but I'm also kind of scared that it won't stand up to this one because I've heard so many good things about this one. being like better than the other ones, so you know, it's kind of conflicting. Then I read The Gunslinger by Stephen King. This is the first book in the Dark Tower series. This is basically Stephen King's fantasy series. I gave this 3 stars. I didn't love it. I much prefer his horror to his fantasy, as I've now learnt, and this has been on my shelf for the longest time, so I thought I'd give it a go. I am kind of curious to continue with the series to see if it gets better. I know that the books get like chunkier as they go along, which is kind of scary because this is only like 230 pages. It's quite a thin one, so I'm like, do I do it? Do I not? Then I binge read the Wayward Children series by Sean and Maguire. There was Every Heart a Doorway, which I gave 3 stars. Down Among the Sticks and Bones, which was my favourite, and I gave that 4 stars. I absolutely adore the characters of Jack and Jill, and I love seeing their story, and I love the Moors setting. And I just want to like reread this one book over and over again, even though it's like the second one in the series. And then we have Beneath the Sugar Sky, which I gave 3 stars. In an Absent Dream, which I gave 3 stars, and Come Tumbling Down, which I also gave 3 stars. So you can tell I've got a clear favourite there. This series was way better than I thought it was going to be, because I'm not a big fantasy reader. I've never read any Sean and Maguire yet, I don't think. So I was like kind of apprehensive going into this series, but I love that like every book is kind of connected, but also they all follow kind of different characters and different plots. I think that's really interesting, how they all kind of interconnect, like a little spider's web. The 6th book in the series comes out in January, and I'll definitely be reading that one. Then I read Fatly Ever After, A Black Fat Girl's Guide to Living Life Unapologetically by Stephanie Yeboah. I give this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. As a plus-size person, it's really interesting to see like your perspective, even though I'm not a known voices reader of this because it's about black fat women, but I am a fat woman, so obviously I tick one of those boxes, and I really enjoyed this. I think it's really interesting to see like other people's stories that are like similar to yours, but everyone has their own story, you know what I mean? Everyone's life is like super unique, so I think it's really interesting to see it from a different perspective. Then I read 1984 by George Orwell. I gave this 3 stars. I was really disappointed. As you know, if you've been here a while, my favourite book is Animal Farm by George Orwell, and I've been putting this off for the longest time. I tried to start it a couple of months ago, and I read like, I think 30 odd pages, and I couldn't get into it, so I thought, I'm going to put this down. I'm obviously not in the right mindset for this right now. Picked it up again, started again. I was just so goddamn disappointed. I'd heard so many good things. This is supposed to be like one of the best books ever, and I just didn't love it. I'm like sad thinking about it. I just want to cry, because I just wanted to love this book so much, and I just couldn't. This was like my least favourite Orwell book I've ever read, and that's so sad to me, because I love his writing. I love his kind of socialist aspects that he has to these books. They're so, like, he's just such a good writer. Why didn't I love this book? I'm so stressed. But, you know, stuff happens. I'm going to be miserable for like the rest of my life, but at least I've got these really nice matching covers for Animal Farm, 1984, and what's the other one that I have? Oh, Burmese Days, forgot about that one. Yeah, so I'm just disappointed. If George Orwell was alive today, I'd send him a tweet, tell him he's disappointed in me. That was so weird. Never say that again. Let's move on from my sadness. Then I read Ashes by Christopher DeVink. This is a World War II story about the Holocaust from a Belgian perspective. I thought this was really interesting. I'd never read a World War II historical fiction from a Belgian perspective. I think it's a really kind of unique perspective, because you usually get like a Polish perspective or a German perspective. You don't often see Belgium. You don't hear a lot about Belgium when you kind of revisit war history. So I think it was like super interesting to see this story from a Belgian perspective. It's kind of based on a true story, but also kind of not. Because I believe it was Christopher DeVink's either father or grandfather were like in Belgium during the war effort. So, you know, I keep saying I don't like historical fiction, but I think I do. And I think I just need to accept that. I've always said it's like one of my least favourite genres, but I read so much historical fiction and rate it so highly. And then I'm like, oh, I don't like historical fiction. Grow up. Right, now we're over that. I think I'm having a nervous breakdown during a wrap-up. And I read How It All Blew Up by Arvin Armadi. I gave this 3 stars. This was one of my most anticipated books for September 2020. And it was just disappointing. Once again, Kira is disappointed by a book. Who'd have guessed it? This is a story of Amir, who isn't out to his Muslim parents, and he basically runs away to Rome, has this like coming of age story where he meets a bunch of other gay gentlemen in Italy who seem nice. Love to hang out with them. And there's like drama, there's all sorts. There's also like these interrogation room scenes that kind of split up the book. Some people didn't like those. I like those quite a bit. I think it kind of broke up the book a little bit, so it wasn't all text, because honestly I found it quite difficult to get through, which is sad. But, you know, books aren't for everybody. Then I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This was really good. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed this concept. Basically, you can go back in time, but you have to come back before the coffee gets cold. There's like a bunch of rules, and one of them is like you can only go and see people who have visited the cafe, and you have to stay in this one seat in the cafe. It's just really interesting. There's a sequel to this book, which is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe, which I'll definitely be picking up at some point, because I'm really kind of interested to see more tales from this cafe. And then we have a personal favourite, Peanuts, The Beagle Has Landed, Charlie Brown, by Andy Beale. I love Peanuts so much. I swear I'm gonna talk about Peanuts in every wrap up now, just for the sake of it. But I just love Peanuts comic books. There's this one scene where Woodstock is cleaning space gunk off of Snoopy's helmet, and he's got like his little like spray gun and his squeegee, and I just love that. He's like a tiny bird. Why does he have a tiny squeegee? I love him. Moving on. I read 3 books from the series Unfortunate Events series. Those were number 3, The Wide Window, number 4, The Miserable Mill, and number 5, The Austere Academy. I love this series. It brings back so much nostalgia, and I'll definitely be continuing this series in the coming months. I'd have read more than 3 this month if I had the time. Quite frankly, I just love it. I gave them all 3 stars because, like, they're not fantastic books. They're just kind of nostalgic, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything like super special about the writing or the story, but the adults in these books are just so stupid. I'm glad my parental guardians weren't like that. That's for sure. Then I read An Orc, which was Just Like You by Nick Hornby. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was an interesting love story, and it's based around like Brexit, which is interesting. I think Nick Hornby does like actual events really well, but it also felt a bit kind of overwhelmingly unnecessary. It's one of those things where I'm like, too soon. But you know, it was interesting. I thought the love story was interesting. There's a lot of drama, a lot of stuff happens, so yes, stuff happens in this book. Nice. Then another arc, which was Why Did Hitler Hate the Jews? The Origins of Adolf Hitler's Anti-Semitism and Its Outcome by Peter Den Hertog. I gave this 3 stars also. I thought this was interesting. I really enjoyed like the first, say, 40% where we talk about Hitler's younger life, kind of his struggles and kind of trauma that he went through that could kind of cause him to be quite paranoid and vindictive towards others. But then it just like randomly starts talking about completely unnecessary things, and I'm like, oh, this is boring now. And I just got bored, to be honest. I just got bored. I love reading non-fiction about like war, but I just got bored. This book was boring, and that's the truth. Then. This bad boy, Prayer of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Give this 4 stars. I really like this book. I've already read this with Brooke from Brooke's Books to force her to read it, because it took her like a month to read 100 pages. So I kind of teamed up to get through this absolute thick boy. I got this from the library. Nice. So, The Prayer of the Orange Tree. I gave it a 4-star rating. I didn't think it was the perfect kind of fantasy for me, but it kind of felt like a Game of Thrones-esque story. And it jumped kind of between, you can't see me there, it jumped between perspectives quite a lot, which I know some people didn't like, but I feel like it kind of keeps you on your toes, and you don't get too attached to these characters before you kind of move on, which I think is interesting. Just like how in Game of Thrones every chapter is like 10 pages and it's about a different character. I really liked like the start, where everything was kind of getting set up, then the middle was kind of like, give or take it, you know. And then the ending, when the action actually started happening, I really enjoyed it. But I do think this book could have done better, perhaps as a series, rather than just like a big boy. Because I feel like I've kind of lost track of the information happening at the start by the time I got to the end. Which I find happens quite a lot with really big books. Because my memory is awful. So when I get to like a big book and I'm like, wait, what happened like 10 minutes ago, you know? It's just hard for me to keep track of. Then we have City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. I gave this 3 stars. I really enjoyed like the first half, but I feel like this story could have been told much faster, and it kind of lost me a little bit in the middle because I just kind of wasn't interested anymore in the middle because it just took so long. Also the chapters are really long and I kind of felt like I wasn't getting anywhere in this book, but I was really interested in the story and I'll be picking up book 2 in the series next month. Then I read another arc, which was The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was really interesting, but I felt like it'd been done so many times before, like this whole like murder vibe. I don't know, it was just like a team of old people that like to solve murders, and whilst I love that, this book also made me cry, which is really interesting actually for like a 3-star book. But I just love old people, and there was like this bit and I was like, oh, I just can't take it. But I'm glad I read this book, especially because I had it as an arc. I kind of had to. But I think it was really interesting, kind of the concept of like the old people and whatnot. Everyone loves old people, like sweet little old people that are nice, not like the evil old people. Now I'm just talking about old people and not this book. Basically, the Thursday Murder Club is a group of people who meet on Thursdays for their murder club, and they basically have someone from the police with them who brings in cases from like unsolved murders, and they try and solve these murders that are like from like closed cases that were unsolved. And then like some drama kicks off in their village and someone gets murdered, and then another person gets murdered, and it's so much going on, honestly. So I think if like mystery kind of crime is your vibe, then go for it. But personally, I don't think it's really like my cup of tea all that much, so unfortunate, but it happens. Then I read Elevation by Stephen King. I gave it 3 stars. I really liked the kind of initial story, which was about elevation, right? But then there's this second story in this book, and it just threw me through such a loop. I was like, what is going on? There was like a dog and a crocodile, and then it ended, and I was like, what is happening? So yes, not my favourite. Like the first story was really interesting concept, and I thought it was like really fun, but then it just kind of, like a dog nearly got ate by a crocodile. I was like, what is going on? So, you know, I won't be revisiting that one. And then we're down to our last 3 books, which were books in a series. I read all of these in one day because I just couldn't stop myself. This series is just ridiculously addictive. I don't know how anyone could just read one of these books and put them down. This was the Selection series. I read The Selection, The Elite, which I don't own, and The One, all by Kira Cass. This is basically, it's like a bachelor type story where the prince, Maxon, is looking for a new wife, and there's 35 potential women from each, there's basically one from each district in Iliad, I think the place is called, I'm so forgetful. And this follows our main character, America, who is part of the selection. It says here, reality TV meets dystopian fairy tale, charming, captivating, and filled with just the right amount of swoon, which I very much agree with. I was going to continue with the series, but I was kind of scared that I wouldn't be as hooked on book 4, which is about, I can't tell you that, because it's a spoiler. I always do that, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to tell you something, but then I can't. But yeah, I love this series. I'm definitely going to continue and read book 4 in October, and book 5, and maybe like the short stories, because I'm, oh my god, I'm an addict. I'm obsessed. But yeah, I am just really in love with this series. I hate how much I really like this series. But those are all the books that I read this month. If you made it this far, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you had to deal with this. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.